Hi, hey, hello everyone. Welcome to our third College of Liberal Arts and Sciences mixtape event. I'd like you to imagine a time, some of us lived it, right? When there was no internet, you had to actually record things off the radio or your record collection. And because it wasn't so easy to put together a message to someone maybe you had a crush on, and you were really shy, and then you were too shy to give it to them. It worked once with my wife, though, so that's good. Hey, what often people were doing, especially in sort of the indie rock scenes and hip hop, was making mixtapes. And when you took that out of your pocket and you handed it to someone, it wasn't just handing them music, right? Because there was a narrative arc in that mixtape, and it said something like, I totally have a crush on you, and I wish you'd ask me out because I'm too shy to do it, kind of stuff. You can tell I have loads of game, right? That's what we're doing here in these events. We're putting together a mixtape that is, in fact, we call it a love letter to our staff and faculty and students in that same way. And when a receiver got that, they appreciated it because it took effort and time to put that thing together. Have any of you ever tried to record on a tape deck off the radio to get the one song? Yeah, it's terrible. It took like, you had to stay up all night and listening to top 40 or something like that. Same thing is true here. Our speakers have put this together to show who they are and what they're doing within the college, and also how their work really matters to the local community, the region, as well as internationally. Our focus today, the theme of the tape, is really surrounding climate change as a focus. So what I'd like to do is get started, and then we'll make some acknowledgements at the end. I think the speakers, if they have time, and certainly a few of us who organize this will stick around if you want to talk either about climate change or mixtapes, right? We'll be here to do that. All right, so again, welcome and thanks for coming. It's good to see you in person or on Zoom. Let me say that we're going to start out here with poet Molly Kugel. Dr. Kugel is an instructor in our English department. You're going to see a lot of English. I don't know what you guys are doing in English, but something's happening there that's really amazing what's coming out of that department. She is going to read here a poem from her newest book, published this year, called Brown Cover. Please, and welcome her, please.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everyone for inviting me today. Is the sound okay? I'm going to read one poem, Toward Them. In the meantime, as the world is burning, before the brink of extinction, we must take stock. 10 bushes of Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly, a flying weed, a citrus-colored singing, an area on the roadside. Prefer glades and prairies born from rain shadow. O forb, coarse perennial, milkweed one, near the longleaf pine habitat, burned for restoration. You, pleurisy, yearn for open air, a broken canopy, and grow in the wake of controlled burn. Seem to thrive when we comb you and try to understand. Name for what we would kill or cure a tea steeped with skunk cabbage for that pain in your chest, a hard breath. Some colonists later considered you a panacea. After learning botany from the Menominee people, but instead of truth, they learned use. There wasn't a tobacco offering. There wasn't any singing to your roots as they dug in the meadow of quiet. A songless air hushed and torn radix. They possessed you like brocades, damask, and scarlet shoes. Used you for flu, colds, fever, nausea, and assorted pulmonary issues. Was there once a chance to evolve? The ecstasy of the herbarium, the euphoria of Thoreau walking clubs? Learn the names again, say the Latin from Asclepius, Greek god of healing. The medicinal, something sacred, Sacren, the obsolete 12th century verb to make holy, or the old French, sacre, to consecrate, anoint, dedicate, another act of dominion. It seems to all lead back to this place. There were those who told us what to love, who told us of this approach, this encroaching grief upon our shoulder. Even at this late hour, all long asleep, covered in sheets, we could still wander out to a glen. Near a pine wood, their orange stars will open one by one. Let's make our way toward them. Thank you.
Any good mixtape means that kind of song that everyone kind of knows and can relate to, but sets the tone. So I'm going to play a song by the band REM. I know my daughter is saying that's old people music, it's old timey and stuff like that, but it plays. It's a song called The End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine. That song, by the way, people of my vintage and identity, that was like on every mixtape for years. Because it did, and we included it for two reasons, right? To maybe do less boring things in academics when we present, or interesting things that we can relate to. But also, there's kind of two messages there, right? There's the one where cynicism, should someone feel fine if it's really the end of the world? But also, the song doesn't display that and how it's formed, right? There's some optimism in that song as well. And it also begs the question, whatever happened to the tidy whities, right? It went extinct in our world from that skater kid, right? All right, when we go to our next track, this will be a presentation that I'm quite excited about, and I think does represent the great things, creative things that are happening within the college. And this will be presented as our third track on our mixtape by Dr. Michelle Comstock, who's an associate professor in the Department of English. And she is also an associate dean for a lot of things, it turns out. I didn't quite understand, but diversity, equity initiatives, to summarize it that quickly. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
When you go into administration, it turns out you start out as a chair, which is just chair. And then above that, you get lots of words after your name, apparently. And this, she has a current book that's in process called Composing Resonance, Culture and Collaboration in Sonic Practices. And she's going to talk to us about the sounds of climate change. So Michelle, please.
Usually the humanities goes last. So thank you, Mike and Lisa. So I'm here to, like Molly, offer humanities perspective on climate change. And the questions that the humanities asks are, how do humans experience climate change and adaptation? And how do they historicize that experience? And how do they articulate it, narrate it, imagine it? And mine crosses over with the arts quite a bit, as you'll see. Okay, great. So I'm gonna start with my personal experience of climate change. And like many of us, when I think of the word climate change, I think of Al Gore and the hockey stick chart showing growing levels of CO2 in our environment with red, lots of red, saturated charts. I also think of oil spills. You know what? I want to go through. Can I take it off? Oh, good. Okay. I'm going through these slides quickly. Stranded animals, mid-migration. And again, these charts are getting redder and redder, right? And so sometimes my response as a humanities person is, wow, that's so abstract. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm going to immediate despair or denial. But they say that one of the ways we start caring about climate change is to actually experience it up close through disaster. And so I think my family and I changed course in 2013 during the Boulder County 100-year flood. And I think many of you in here were affected by it. But we lived in Louisville at the time. And so we sat huddled in our living room for 2 days, and all we heard outside was. Now, some of you might find that a calming sound. You can download it and go to sleep by it. But for my family and I, it's a sound of alarm. And at that point, we're like, wow, this is not normal. What can we do about it? And my question was a little more concrete. And it was, how can sound as a medium wake us up? And how can sound as a medium, because it's a medium we often can't control very well, teach us about a relationship to the environment, how we're inextricably tied to everything that happens. And so I started researching sound art, particularly sonic environmental art. And the first category I encountered were those artists who were recording loss. It's a very important subfield of sonic art. And the most famous person in that category at the time was Bernie Krause. And he would record, in this instance, Lincoln Meadows before and after logging and global warming. I'm going to play this clip. You're going to have to listen closely because the sound is not great. Oh, wait, that's a different clip. That's okay. Lincoln, yeah, there we go. No, not the, yeah. So it should just be a screen recording. There we go. And this is after. So the experiences in what you don't hear or no longer hear. The second form of sonic environmental art is sonifying data. And composers take data from rivers, and in this case, one of those CO2 charts I showed you earlier. Oops. So the point is to help us experience these changes instead of having them pictured in an abstract chart. The third category is a little more recent because technology's come a long way with microphones. And Jeff Rice is one of the people who goes around with a hydrophone and it attaches it to root systems, in this case, the Pando Forest root system. He records a storm going through the Pando Forest, which is one big aspen tree connected. And as the aspen leaves quake in the wind, you can hear them through the vibrations of the tree. So if you put your ear up to the stereo, you'll feel the tree quaking, and that's the point. It gives voice to the tree and also helps you feel what they feel. The fourth category are sound walks, which Hildegard Westerkamp is famous for, and Janet Cardiff, and they take a particular piece of land and narrate it for you, telling stories from the past, ancestral stories, and also amplifying some of the non-human elements along the way. So more recently, artists and scholars are looking closely at the ways we listen, not just the sounds that are coming from the environment. And these Indigenous artist scholars are asking, how are Western settlers listening to these sounds? Often we collect them and store them and hoard them. Often we try to extract data or information from them. Whereas Kyle White argues that we should listen instead for the kinship ties that we have with the land and with each other. Greg Deal is an artist I met. I was very fortunate to meet a few years ago. And he's pointing to this way of listening. I'm just going to play this video and see if you can get it. It's a short clip, but you'll see that ordinarily Westerners especially go to powwows expecting color and culture and music. And the music's being pumped into Greg and his daughter's ears, and they're performing in black. So what they're telling us is this is what you're missing. You can still see our relationship with the land and our ancestors, but you can't consume anything else. So now my question is, in my current research is, what are the sounds of climate justice? So learning from these Indigenous scholars and artists, I'm asking, what are the sounds of the rhythmic building of ties among people, the land, and their traditional ancestral ways? And more climate scientists and mitigators are asking this question too, because if you go in and put in windmills and solar and you don't talk to the community, it doesn't work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I hadn't thought about that previously yet. And when you're a biologist, you think about climate change all the time at this point, because it's changing what we study very quickly. So our next track, track 4, comes from work out of Dr. Diana Tomback's lab in integrative biology. And I'd also like to say we have a co-presenter who's not here today, but in this video, Diana will introduce Dr. Libby Pansing, who I'm really proud to say is an alumna of our PhD program in integrative and systems biology. And she's now working at a nonprofit called American Forest, taking this conservation work forward. Diana, please.
Thank you and good morning. I'm really pleased to be part of this. I'm going to read this because I tend to be a little bit talky, and this will keep me on script here so we can get to the meat and potatoes, so to speak. So 50 years ago, process that, last summer, I started my doctoral studies working in high elevation forests in the eastern Sierra Nevada. I was studying a relative of jays, crows, and magpies called the Clark's nutcracker, named after William Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition. In the course of my research, I discovered that the nutcracker was the primary seed disperser. In other words, the main way the seeds got disseminated for a unique high elevation forest tree, white bark pine. The bird preferred the seeds of this tree for food, and it stored the seeds in the ground to retrieve months later. But the trick is it didn't retrieve all the seeds months later. What followed has been a journey. I came to CU Denver in 1981. In 1986, I was asked by the US Forest Service Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana, to join an interdisciplinary team to learn why white bark pine was declining. In 2001, frustrated with a lack of progress, a few of us started the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit based in Montana. I was volunteer director for 18 years of the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation. Thus, my career took a different kind of trajectory, research and science-based advocacy. Several of my graduate students came on the journey with me, notably doctoral student Elizabeth Pansing, known as Libby, whom Mike just mentioned. She graduated from CU Denver 4 years ago as campus outstanding graduate student. She is now a staff scientist, their first researcher for the environmental organization, American Forest. This is the oldest environmental nonprofit in the US. She's working on reforestation issues, including white bark pine. This past January, after a lot of work, white bark pine was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, the most widely distributed tree to be on the list. So, white bark pine thrived for millennia in the West, literally until the 20th century. It is now succumbing to invasive disease, pine beetles, megafires, and climate change. It is a poster child for the Anthropocene. People who know the tree through recreation, science, and their work become advocates. We are fighting to save it. I am proud to present this video, Hope and Restoration. The project was funded by our partner, Ricketts Conservation Foundation, and filmed and assembled by the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. My part was filmed here, just upstairs a few floors. All the people you see are part of the White Bark Pine Circle of Advocates. The video illustrates what focused advocacy can accomplish. Never give up. Thank you.
The evidence is abundant and irrefutable that people are drawn on to wildlands. There's something that resonates in the human soul, in our human condition. And there is a particular resonance that comes from having white bark pine forests present. It is unique within a landscape that's unique. It has a sense of timelessness because you are walking through a forest of trees that are hundreds of years old. And what they offer on the landscape can't be replicated. It can't be duplicated in a short period of time. In a culture that seems to gravitate to the immediate, there is a longevity, a permanence that you find in white bark pine forests that, even if we can't fully express it, draws us in.
The thing that I admire and appreciate the most about white bark pine is its tenacity. You see this thing growing on the most amazing rich tops and in these environments where no other tree can exist.
We've been working with white bark pine for several years now, and I think of it like our people. Our people have survived. Our people are resilient.
There's something really magical about being in a really high elevation place that's really windy and really inhospitable, and to see these giant, beautiful things thriving.
White bark pine is almost exclusively a high elevation tree within its entire range. They're the craggy, gnarled trees that you see at timberline. They're that top layer to the forest in the mountains, all the way to the Sierras, Cascades, and north into Alberta and British Columbia.
If you are going hiking at high elevations, you probably passed a white bark in the Western United States and not known it. If you are going backcountry skiing, or if you're at many of the ski resorts in the Western United States, you've probably skied past a white bark and not known it.
Where white bark pine grows, its canopies redistribute snow. The shade from their crowns will preserve that snow well into the summer.
These forests actually stabilize the snowpack, allowing the snow to melt slower, to provide high quality water for longer periods during the summer.
In this area, a lot of folks downstream rely on that snow melt for their irrigation water, for their culinary water, to replenish the water in the water table.
White bark pine has so many benefits, but probably the most important ecosystem service that white bark provides is a wildlife food source. A white bark cone is about 4 or 5 inches long, and they are very fatty. But the magic is what's inside the cone.
White bark produces these unbelievably large seeds, the largest seed of any tree that we have in the Northern Rockies.
Because the cones are large with a big nut, a lot of animals rely on them, and the grizzly bears love it.
They're trying to put on fat for going into the den for a winter period. They need to gain as much weight as possible. And the white bark pine offers them a large return for the energy expended to receive it. And we have enough data after many years of research to know that they are inexorably tied to the white bark pine.
You're in the midst of a white bark pine forest here. When it's a good white bark year, this is a wildlife hub. So this is a real important area for bears, for red squirrels, but the nutcrackers are arguably the most spectacular.
I think that the most interesting thing about white bark that really catches people's attention is the fact that the tree could not exist without this bird that plants its seeds.
Almost all the white bark pine reproduction up and down the Rocky Mountain chain is due to nutcrackers caching the seeds. So this forest really depends on the bird.
The nutcracker will come along and remove the seeds from the cone. And then they bury small clusters of these seeds pretty much everywhere in the high mountain environment.
They stash these seeds, sometimes up to tens of thousands of caches, and no one can believe that they can recover these things, but they do. They don't get them all though. And so some of those caches grow into white bark pine, and most of white bark pine is established that way. And so the two are intertwined. So it's a really very important relationship, and it's starting to fall apart. It's falling apart because the white barks are dying for multiple reasons. And it's exemplified here. Everything I look out and see as dead is white bark.
Since the start of my career, the decline of white bark pine is just breathtaking. In areas, we've lost over 90 to 95% of these trees.
I began to see whole entire upper watersheds die. It was heartbreaking to see that.
You go out there and it's really hard to find a healthy tree on the landscape. It's depressing. It's everything from these little tiny seedlings that are less than a foot tall all the way up to the biggest trees on the landscape. And every single one of them virtually has white pine blister rust.
White bark pine is facing extinction primarily because of white pine blister rust. White pine blister rust is this non-native fungus that infects a tree through its needles and slowly creates these cankers that then cut off the flow of nutrients and water, killing limbs. Over time, that spreads and will kill the entire tree.
This disease has been spreading through white bark pine for nearly a century. This is the main existential threat to white bark pine.
I think if you look back on some of the history of diseases like this, pathogens that have gone through North America, the classic case is chestnut blight. which came into the eastern US in the late 1800s. And 40 years later, there were no American chestnut left in the forest.
If we fail to do anything for white bark pine, we are going to end up with many regions of our high mountain areas without it, and we lose the ecosystem services, the wildlife food, the habitat protection, the watershed protection. It will be very apparent that some cataclysm affected our western forests mightily on a large scale.
I don't think I'll need it. So as we're coming in here to set up, we're looking for trees that we know to be genetically resistant to blister rust. So these are the ones we're going to be caging in today.
We have no cure for white pine blister rust, and the only recourse we have is to look for the small number of individuals in each population that seems to have natural genetic resistance. Those individuals are the foundation of restoring white bark pine.
These cones will be shipped to the Coeur d'Alene nursery in Idaho and eventually used to grow seedlings in the nursery.
The seedlings we are growing have some level of resistance to blister rust. On average, we're growing about 150,000 seedlings per year. 150,000 one-year-old seedlings, 150,000 two-year-old seedlings.
When we plant trees, the first thing is we really look for an excellent planting location. We're looking for a log that's down or maybe a stump, something that's going to provide shade and hold some moisture and give it the best life and the best start that it can have.
It's very gratifying to go out and see these seedlings on the landscape. It is very humbling, I'll say, that we are having such an impact. And in the special case of white bark pine, where this is a threatened species, we're able to recreate it and put it back on site.
I have a lot of hope for the future of white bark pine because I see the passion in the people who are working to restore it. They're doing their research, planting trees, collecting cones, growing all the seedlings. And I look at all these marvelous, passionate, committed people, and I can't help but have hope.
We have a lot of people that care about the fate of this tree, but we're realistic because we've moved an inch and we know that we've got a mile to go.
I am incredibly optimistic about the future of white bark. I am incredibly sad about what the landscape looks like currently, but I can't imagine looking at this as the death knell. It's not.
Restoration is totally possible. We've done it, we are doing it, and we'll continue to do it. I want to be able to leave something for the next generation so that they can participate and see what I'm seeing and experience what I experienced. When you're up at that high elevation and you're sitting in a white bark pine stand, the Clark nutcrackers are flying around, and it's magical. And I shouldn't be the only one who gets to experience that.
You gotta think like, you know, this is not just for me. It's for the future generation. The forestry program, for the first time in our history, planted 2,000 trees. I won't see those trees mature, but our grandchildren and our children are going to see those trees mature. And that's, to me, what it's all about.
About 90% of white bark pine occurs on public lands in the United States. So it's critically important that we, as public land management agencies, are actively involved in white bark pine conservation.
I think the responsibility to restore white bark pine rests with us all. No matter where the pine grow, we all have an obligation to make sure that this species, which is just so critical for high elevation habitat, doesn't wink out on our watch.
the more that I've worked with White Park, the more that I have hope. Because I understand now that there are things we can do about it. We have a plan forward. We know how to restore the species. Now we need the resources to do that. One of my favorite quotes, it goes, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade we do not expect to sit."
Did you listen to that? Hear some of the background? Hear that chickadee at the end, right? So thanks. Do you notice a theme here, right? I promised you a good mixtape, the one that gets you the wife or the girlfriend or the boyfriend, whoever you're after, right? Or the friend, has an arc to it. And I'd like you to notice, it doesn't matter if we're scientists, we're artists, we're in the humanities or social sciences. What are we doing in this field is really working on the connections, might be between a bird and a grizzly bear with trees in the middle, or it might be understanding how other people respond to changes and challenges in these areas. I'll say this really quickly. One of the major reasons I chose to work here was because I was familiar with and was just a fan of that Clark's Nutcracker work that Dr. Tomback had done, and their ability to cache and remember so many locations still melts my brain down. It's hard to understand because unless my wallet, my keys are right there in the place I put it in the one basket, I can't find anything in the world, right, when I go home. So it's remarkable work. So thank you, Dr. Tomback and Dr. Carter. All right, well, the next track is going to be presented by Dr. Ivan Ramirez, who is an assistant professor CTT, which is a clinical teaching track for those of you who might not be familiar with these academic titles and so forth. But he's housed in health and behavioral science, and he has a background both in geography as well as in engaging with social justice as part of his work as well. So I'd like to welcome you, please.
I was afraid I wasn't tall enough for the to stand here, but I am. I'm fine. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. What I'd like to share with you is what motivates me, what I'm passionate about, and what drives my scholarship. And there are three areas that I'm particularly interested in. I'm interested in a lot of things, but climate change and health, or climate and health. I'm interested in disaster risk reduction, which is reducing and mitigating the impacts from climate and other hazards, and as well as community engagement, which is a third area that I'm really passionate about. And I really bring into the classroom, and I'm trying to evolve that more into my research. But what underpins those three areas and what really motivates me is the questions about equity and justice, right? Raising questions. What are the implications, but also thinking about equitable solutions. Sure. So I have many stories about what interests me or why I'm passionate about climate. One is that I'd like to share with you is a phenomenon called El Nino, which some of you may know, but I'm obsessed with it. All right, since I was in graduate school, probably started when I was in undergrad doing some undergraduate research work. And the El Nino phenomenon, if you're not familiar with it, is a climate variability pattern that evolves or develops in the tropical Pacific Ocean along the equator. During the El Ninos, warm waters shift from the Western Pacific towards the Central and Eastern Pacific. Now, these are large-scale environmental changes. The Pacific is big. And when this happens, it's bringing warm waters, it's also bringing moisture towards the east, and there are not only impacts and connections in the oceans, but there are also atmospheric responses and what we refer to as teleconnections around the world. And what these teleconnections do is that they impact local to regional weather patterns. Now, what you see in this graph here, or this image, is a very strong event, one of the strongest, I think it was the strongest El Nino of the 20th century, the 1999 1998 event. And what you see here is above average or anomalous sea surface temperatures that are piling up near the coast of northwestern South America. And not only is it Peru and Ecuador impacted there, but Chile, as well as other places, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, and even the US and Colorado. Now, this event was well documented and was associated with a number of disasters. Now, we don't call them natural disasters because we think that, at least in my field, disasters are not natural, they're unnatural, and they're socially constructed. And that brings me to a point that I'm very much interested. What the map doesn't show you here, or the graph, is really vulnerability. And right, and understanding what are the conditions and what are the factors and what are the processes that contribute to and generate vulnerability of populations to climate. And that led me to focus on social dimensions, ethical dimensions, and in particular, I was thinking about health, which I feel like kind of bridges the three. Now, I wanted to share this image from my doctoral dissertation work because my conception of it and reflection of it has changed over time. So one of the things I was really interested in and what caught my attention was thinking about disease outbreaks in South America. And there's a something that I think is still unresolved is what contributed to the cholera epidemics in the 1990s to emerge in Latin America. And there's a hypothesis that says El Nino triggered it. And that's what I pursued. But what's really interesting is that once I got to Peru, I had to reframe what I was thinking about because I started talking to the local scientists and to local people about that. And one of the things that drew attention to me was really about local knowledge, local communities, as well as regional science. All right, I'll get to the picture now. So what this picture is showing is that when I first arrived to a place called Piura, Piura is located about 1,000 kilometers north of Lima. It's on the coast. It's a dry, arid area, as much of the coast of Peru is. Piura is very special to El Nino's story because it's where the name originates. And it's documented probably in the late 1890s or so. And, you know, local communities, not only fishing populations, but farmers saw these impacts that really occurred around Christmas or so when the El Nino peaks and is associated with extreme temperatures, but also torrential rains. Not all the time, but during some events, right? And this occurs every few years. And so Piura is special. And so I arrived there. I was there to study cholera. And when I arrived, I saw all these protests happening. And these are public health workers striking for better conditions, better social conditions. And, you know, what I initially thought is instability, right? And thinking about the social, political, and economic conditions that people face that then intersects with extreme climate and other things that are happening that impact these communities. Now, initially, that's what I thought about vulnerability of communities. But as I started to look more deeply at this image, what I also see is people taking action. They're not passive. Vulnerability is not just susceptibility. It's also how you cope, how you respond to it, and how you adjust, right? And ultimately how you adapt to challenges. And so people are taking action here. And this is initially a picture about injustice, but it's also a picture of just actions. And I feel that this I bring into the classroom and I'm trying to integrate it more in my research. And I think this resonates with students. They care about this climate justice or injustice aspect, in particular, why we should care about what local communities think and what they do and their perceptions, right, which can inform solutions. So what I'd like to do, closing, mine is probably shorter than everyone else's, is a current project that I launched this semester. It's something that I've been thinking about for a long time now. And really, it wasn't just about climate justice. I was thinking about social justice on campus. And I've pitched this a number of times at Equity Task Force and a couple of other places where I said, you know, we need this hub for undergrads that could be about community civic engagement, but also about social justice. And I thought, well, why don't I launch a research aspect of that right now? Really a think tank or research lab and integration, critical thinking, and also doing research that focuses on climate broadly. And I think it relates to a lot of aspects of climate justice. I'm calling it the Civic Engagement and Climate Justice Think Lab. And I've got some funding from the Office of Undergraduate and Creative Activities. Thank you, Erin and Liz and Eureka. And I've got 3 students right now. And this really reflects something that I really want to do. And it's this integration of the research and teaching and providing experience. It's not just for undergrads, it could be for a lot of other people as well. And one of the first projects that we're working on right now is looking at and examining how different countries and different regions define the El Nino, because there are different quantitative definitions and different ways that we qualitatively interpret them, and that impacts responses. And so that's the first project we're working on right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Ramirez. Leadership happens in a lot of subtle ways on this issue, right? An opportunity, and this university is nimble and able to change, and that's the kind of leadership that's a good match for what the things we're trying to challenge, we're trying to work on at this university. Students, can I say something? This is very professorly, so bear with me. I would like to remind you, and I'd be happy to talk to you, and there's others in the room who would, that you're a part of this, that you can participate in the arts, in scholarship, science, social justice initiatives. And I'd encourage you to take that opportunity. I know you also have to earn money to pay for tuition and fees and all that. Housing, food's not cheap these days. But I will say that it can be a really valuable, probably among the most valuable educational experiences you can have at a university. Forces you into big ideas. I think that's why we're all in this room, right? Is we love ideas and the connections among people. So take some time. I can help you personally find opportunities if you're interested in that. But there's, by the way, hint, hint, a really good one to think about. Dr. Tomback still goes to Treeline. Sometimes they helicopter in with students to measure ecology things. There's a lot of opportunity. Now, speaking of students, let me now introduce for our track 6, and I'll have you know this is the last presentation, and then we'll have another poem by Dr. Kugel to end our event. But this is asking the question, why do trees in Alaska matter for climate change? To help us answer that and how we think about it, I'd like to introduce Trevor Carter, who's a graduate student, a PhD candidate in the Integrative and Systems Biology PhD program, which is basically housed in integrative biology as a department, but it's really broader than that. We have faculty and students participating at the Denver Botanical Gardens, at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the Denver Zoo, the Anschutz Medical Campus, Department of Psychology, Department of Chemistry, and so on. And it's meant to provide that opportunity for graduate work that is about thinking about systems and taking information at all these levels and putting them together, hopefully into a story. So, Trevor, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. For those of you who don't know what a PhD student is, like Mike said, I am a student, so I did take classes, but it's also my job. I get paid to do this. And I conduct original research, which is sort of the thesis of my degree. And so I will be presenting some research from my dissertation and tying it into some broader concepts of why do trees in Alaska, why should you care about them, like here in Colorado? So I'm gonna introduce this talk by introducing how I think about climate change. And I think about climate change primarily with CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. I'm sure we all are sort of loosely familiar, right? It traps heat in our atmosphere, and it is pretty strongly correlated with temperature. And CO2 has changed through time, right? We can see CO2 parts per million fluctuating throughout the last 800,000 years. But recently, we see this massive spike, I can't even get up there, in CO2, right? And that rate of change is really a potential cause for concern for scientists like myself. Next, I want to introduce Alaska. Which I think we all are loosely familiar. Maybe we've been to Alaska, we've probably at least heard of Alaska, and we have some idea in our mind of what Alaska is, right? We think of these like beautiful viewscapes where it's dark all winter and sunny all summer. We see like the northern lights. It's really aesthetic and pretty. We have these amazing mountain viewscapes with these picturesque glacier lakes, right? Mostly we think of mountains, we think of snow, we think of like rugged conditions. But that's not really the full story for Alaska. There's sort of this often forgot about component of Alaska called Southeast Alaska. And so if we can do this all together, we make a little hand sign, right? A little like finger gun pointed down. This is not to scale, by the way. We can just see like our thumb, that's the portion of Southeast Alaska. And it's very different from the rest of Alaska. It's kind of otherworldly. It is so dense with vegetation. And that's because its climate is different from the rest of Alaska. It is protected in the sense that it is really close to the coast. So it is a more moderate climate, sort of lower temperatures, not as quite as low as the rest of Alaska, but it's not, stays about 60 degrees, get down to like the 30s. It doesn't fluctuate that much and it gets a ton of precipitation, like an insane amount of precipitation. And we can compare these two things, Southeast and interior Alaska. And we can notice, well, one, those two people look very happy. They're looking at a few sparse trees. That's actually me, if you can see me. I'm not like more than 15, 20 feet away from the photographer. There's so much vegetation and so much trees in these landscapes. And we go out there and we collect information about the trees. We identify it to the species level, and we use some standardized forestry measurements like diameter at breast height. So we basically go up and we hug the tree and we determine what the diameter is and its height. And from that, we can get some really useful information. And so I want to reintroduce a concept probably from general biology, Biology 101, one of the most complex biophysical, biochemical processes we know, photosynthesis, can be reduced quite simply to plants need CO2, and they need water, and they need sunlight. And they use that to grow. Let's think about that for a moment. CO2 is all around us. It's in the air, right? More CO2. Plants take this atom, this carbon atom, and they turn it into mass. They are sequestering it from all around. They are doing this at all times, this invisible thing. And they are generating like mass from that. They are turning, well, I shouldn't say generating, they're converting this atom into mass that we can see more readily. If we were to do this, we can visualize this from an at-home experiment. If you're sort of in your undergraduate career, or you have 5 years to spare, maybe go home, weigh a pot of soil, and plant a seed in there, right? 5 years later, you can take the plant out, and you can measure it, and you can remeasure the soil. And you'll notice that the weight of the soil hardly changes because the plants are getting their weight from the atmosphere around us, and that is primarily carbon. And so in general, when we have more large trees, we think of that as being more carbon stored in the landscape. And these trees are freaking huge, like meters in diameter and hundreds of feet tall. And that is primarily carbon. But that's not like exactly right. Like there are more things that influence the distribution of trees on the landscape other than just the climate. We have things like disturbances, which was loosely discussed earlier, which may take a variety of shapes. And so this is a forest fire. This was actually from the Cameron Peak wildfire that we had in Colorado, right? So we see all these like little blackened toothpicks. Those were trees, and they had a lot of carbon. And we can see green is where the trees are still remaining. They still have carbon. And so there is still carbon being stored in the dead wood, but as a fire burns through, a lot of carbon is being emitted. And so with sort of more common thoughts of climate change, we might anticipate warming, right? Warming means more fires. But that's not really the case of what we anticipate for Southeast Alaska. Climate projections are variable. And for this region, we're anticipating it, yes, to get warmer, but also we're anticipating this area to get wetter. And if it's wetter, that leads to less fires. However, we might anticipate more things like landslides, which are really common disturbances in this ecosystem. They're one of the major disturbances that occur and change the distribution of carbon, right? We can see this like landslide scar here. There were trees there, and now there are trees down here, and they are not alive anymore. And that is a function of lots of precipitation on steeper slopes just eroding out and leading to these trees falling down. Another sort of large disturbance that we might think of is logging, right? This is very prevalent, or we think it is, right? This is a very obvious case. We can see cut stump. There was a tree, there was carbon, now there is not carbon. But that's not really accurate to say that in sort of really vague terms, because a lot of times this carbon is being put into durable wood products. And so it's actually still being stored, but it's just not as visible on the landscape. It's also important to note that this landscape is huge. Southeast Alaska is about 7 million hectares, which is kind of an insane size. Think about Nepal, loosely a little bit less than the size of Nepal. About 5% of the landscape is actively being logged or is available for logging. And so while that is still a lot of carbon being moved around, it's less than we might think. And so I want to undercut this with like, well, what does this mean? Why am I telling you about these trees in Alaska? You might still be concerned. Really, the point I'm trying to get across is that climate change has nuances. Like we've heard a lot of detrimental things, and I think it's really important to understand that climate change has negative impacts on the ecosystems, on people, but it's not so clear-cut. It's not so straightforward all the time. There are nuances where there are certain areas where we might anticipate climate change being a benefit to tree growth, which is sort of odd to think about when we're framing it consistently in this negative viewpoint. The trees in Alaska are particularly important because they store about 8% of carbon in the United States. And that is for the entire United States. And this is both trees and below ground, I should say. And this is a small area in comparison to the rest of the country. I mean, even more impressive, and these numbers might not seem like much, like 0.25% of global forest carbon, even though they're less than 0.25% of global forest area, these areas are just really disproportionately storing carbon. And to sort of tie it together, like how much carbon is actually being stored on this landscape? Imagine 2 football fields side by side. Now imagine parking 200 cars in those football fields made of pure carbon. That's about, on average, how much tree biomass carbon we're estimating to be stored in these landscapes. It is an insane amount of carbon. So with that, I wanted to say thank you. Hopefully you've learned something. I'd be happy to answer any questions as in the next portion. Thank you.
Well, before we get to our last track, another wonderful poem from this book. I'm such a fan now that I know about your work, so you know that. Like I would like to say and offer is if any students here would like to get involved, right? This climate change thing is hard to think about. We put a lot of priority on our individual consumer actions, which we have to. But you're in an opportunity, whether you knew it or not, to participate in solutions with it. And I'll try to see if we can get some of the speakers and some of the people here to stick around. I will help you personally if you'd like to, no matter if you're in the arts or College of Arts and Media, it doesn't matter. I'll work with you to find those resources. Before I get to that, let me thank the steering committee who has organized this. I am a fan. I've worked here for 20 years after meeting Dr. Tomback and kind of fanboying over her work in an interview, and then coming in. And I think I've always enjoyed the ideas and the people who generate them and knowing about them, right? It's important. We have a culture here, and that culture was a little bit broken, right, by the whole remote teaching pandemic thing, and we're working our way back. So thank you for attending and participating. If you don't mind, I'd like to thank Dr. Pamela Jansma, who is our Dean of College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. She's a trusty leader in our college and has really supported this, as well as many of the things you'll see as students, opportunities coming through. And oh, I'm too late, aren't I? But our provost, Dr. Nakuma, is here as well. I'd like to just acknowledge his presence. He's got a busy job and a hard one going on. There's a lot happening at this university right now, as always. But I thank him for being here and participating as well. All right, how about we end with another poem? And then we won't necessarily have a formal question and answer, but as people can stick around for the next 15, 20 minutes, we'll be here. Come introduce yourself, please. That's what I would like, if you could. All right, so we are going to have another poem by Dr. Molly Kugel. She's an instructor, again, in our Department of English. And this will be from her current book that was released this year called Ground Cover. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thanks, everybody. This has just been a wonderful time listening to all of your research. Ground cover. The ground doesn't belong to you, but it is also yours, and that it's made of your body, your cells, your pulsing, the things you're remembering now about your mother, folding laundry in the hallway as she drifted to sleep amidst the dim light. Perennial, glow gray, silky lanate hairs, so woolly, antispasmodic, named woolly woundwort, as wound dressing, poultice, antiseptic. These carpet below hold the buttoned mass of us. They're a way to stem bleeding, analgesic, eared leaves, wrinkling warm, not listening, ear to ear. The flowers sessile without petiole, closest to the stem. No distance of a leaf stalk to grow away from harm. We have to come closer. The cold silver bundles together. The root is felt by the stem and by the leaf, felt. Like what a family won't say about death. To stem, to staunch, to hide one with another. We follow and are undetected. Internally, we could steep it in tea for fevers, hemorrhaging, a hidden, inhibited clotting, weakness of the liver and heart. Above ground, we bend back into alabaster stachys byzantina. The lamb's ear holds us for a little while. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let me just add a quick thanks to the CLAS staff and students who are helping us. Also, Evan, who's hidden away in a booth, I believe, behind us, for helping me not totally melt down in panic over how to audiovisual stuff. But I'm not a professor of audiovisual for sure, right? I'd also just like to make a quick announcement. We're going to continue this series. We have our next scheduled event called Hey, What's Going On? A celebration of CLAS research. It's going to be our kind of Valentine's special. So literally a love letter on February 15th, and we'll continue to promote that. And we'd really like to have you back. Thank you to our speakers. Wow, good work, right? Let's remember we're here for a reason, and we belong in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And I hope you're excited. I'm quite proud of what's going on at this university. Even if we don't have Coach Prime and a football team or whatever, like get in the ESPN or the news all the time, we actually have thinkers and creative people who are leading that charge. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. And again, please introduce yourself to me. And I'd like to, Dr. Karanin is here as well, who's helped lead this. Thank you. We'll end with that. Thanks everyone on Zoom as well.